All right, diving in today, folks, we're going deep, deep into the life of, well, this guy, Paul von Hindenburg.
Oh, yeah, he's a big one. All right, a giant, you could say, in German history.
Hmm.
I mean, you can't really talk about Germany in the early 20th century, especially, well, the rise of the Nazis, without bumping into Hindenburg.
No kidding. And to map out this journey, this incredible rise and, well, kind of tragic fall, we've got, as usual, our trusty Wikipedia article. It's got all the twists and turns from, his early days as a Prussian military man to becoming president of Germany. It's wild.
You said it. It's like a one-man history lessons.
Seriously. So for our listeners out there, we're aiming for that sweet spot, that deep understanding without like drowning in information overload.
Hmm.
We'll connect the dots, give you the key moments, those aha moments, and, help you see the bigger picture.
Exactly. Hindenburg's life is, well, it's a case study. Military leadership, political maneuvering, you name it, he did it.
Mm.
And all against the backdrop of this, like, intensely dramatic period in world history.
Okay, so back to the beginning, right? Posen, 1847, this little guy pops into the world, Paul von Hindenburg. But not just any little guy, right? He's born into Prussian nobility, like serious blue bloods.
Oh, yeah, and deeply proud of it, too. Their family history, man, it goes way back. I mean, we're talking like 1289, way back. They trace their lineage to, the Teutonic Knights. Talk about a sense of tradition.
Wow. Okay, so from day one, this guy's steeped in what? Duty, honor, all that Prussian stuff, right?
Absolutely. That kind of aristocratic upbringing, it leaves its mark. It shapes your values, your outlook on the world. And for Hindenburg, it paved the way for, well, a military career, which was pretty typical for someone of his background.
Right. So he starts as a cadet, does the whole, military school thing, and eventually joins the 3rd Regiment of Foot Guards.
The Prussian military was like the gold standard back then.
And this wasn't just parade ground stuff either. This guy, he saw real action. The Austro-Prussian War in 1866. He almost got taken out at Königgrätz. A bullet actually hit his helmet. Can you imagine?
Talk about a close call.
Then, boom, a few years later, it's the Franco-Prussian War, 1870-71. And guess what? He's there, right in the thick of it, present for the proclamation of the German Empire at Versailles. I mean, talk about historical moments.
You have to wonder what was going through his mind at those moments.
Yeah.
Those early military experiences, they must have shaped him deeply. The camaraderie, the danger, well, the brutality of war. It's not something you forget easily.
Not to mention the sheer physicality of it all. This guy, he was massive, 6'6". Can you imagine him on the battlefield? Talk about an imposing figure.
It's true. That kind of presence, it definitely adds to the aura,
Yeah.
And it probably played a role in his later popularity, too.
For sure. Okay, so after the wars, he just keeps climbing the ladder. War Academy in Berlin, General Staff Corps, even teaches at the academy for a bit. By 1900, he's a lieutenant general. I mean, that's impressive.
He was clearly a rising star.
And then, in 1911, after 46 years of service, he retires. Like, that's a career, right?
Hmm.
And at this point, he's, a staunch monarchist, totally dedicated to the Kaiser, but he's not really interested in politics, at least not actively.
It seems like he was content with his military career, but of course, history had other plans.
Yeah, no kidding. 1914, World War I breaks out. And guess who gets called back into service?
Old Hindenburg, right. And this is where his story really takes off.
Big time. He's given command of the 8th Army in East Prussia, and this is crucial. Erich Ludendorff is appointed as chief of staff. This partnership, it's like the dynamic duo of the German military.
A match made, well, if not in heaven, then at least on the battlefield. They were a force to be reckoned with.
No doubt. So things start off, a bit rocky for the Germans on the Eastern Front. The Russians are advancing. But then, boom, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, they pull off this incredible victory at the Battle of Tannenberg.
One of the most decisive battles of the entire war.
Seriously. I mean, the numbers are mind-boggling. They capture 92,000 Russian soldiers, and their own casualties are just 14,000. It's a crushing defeat for the Russians.
And it instantly catapults Hindenburg into, like, superstar status. He becomes a national hero overnight.
It's crazy. And the thing is, the name Tannenberg itself, it was chosen for a reason. You see, back in 1410, there was this battle, the real Battle of Tannenberg, where the Teutonic Knights were defeated by the Poles and Lithuanians. So by calling this World War I victory Tannenberg, they're tapping into this like historical narrative of, German revenge and all that.
Propaganda at its finest. They used this victory to create a powerful myth, a narrative of Hindenburg as the savior of Germany.
And it worked. People loved him. He was the man of the hour. And This partnership with Ludendorff, it's fascinating. They were like total opposites personality-wise. Hindenburg, he was the steady, decisive leader, the rock. And Ludendorff, he was more dynamic, tactically brilliant, a bit more impulsive, but they complemented each other perfectly.
A classic case of opposites attract, at least in a military sense.
Totally. So after Tannenberg, the victories on the Eastern Front, they just keep coming. He uses these tactics called Schwerpunkte, which basically means, concentrate your forces at the weakest point and punch through. And it works. The first battle of the Masurian Lakes, they inflict huge losses on the Russians. He gets appointed Oberost, the commander in the east, and by the end of 1914, he's a field marshal.
A meteoric rise, really.
No kidding. But here's the thing. Even with all these successes, there's this, tension brewing. He's butting heads with Erich von Falkenhayn, who's the chief of the general staff, about how to handle the Eastern Front. Hindenburg, he's all about encircling the Russians in Poland, going for the knockout blow. But Falkenhayn, he's not so sure.
Yeah, there was a real strategic clash there. Hindenburg and Ludendorff, they were laser-focused on the east, while Falkenhayn was more concerned with the Western Front, where, things weren't going so well for the Germans.
Right. But despite this, tension, Hindenburg keeps racking up wins in the east. The Second Battle of the Masurian Lakes, they capture over 100,000 Russian prisoners. He plays a key role in the Gorlice-Tarnów offensive. They're pushing the Russians back, capturing huge chunks of territory.
And it wasn't just about brute force. Hindenburg, he was innovative too. The Buggenaroo offensive, for example, they used these new artillery tactics, really devastating stuff.
Yeah, they were constantly adapting, trying to find new ways to, break through those Russian lines. And they basically carve out this massive occupied zone called Oberost, which is like this whole other administrative challenge. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, governing a territory that size in the middle of a war, it's a logistical nightmare.
But here's the thing. Even with all this success, Hindenburg, he's not totally satisfied. He looks back at 1915 and he says, and I quote, "The Russian bear has escaped our clutches." He wanted that decisive victory, the one that would knock Russia out of the war completely.
He was ambitious, that's for sure. He wanted nothing less than total victory.
And then, in 1916, things take a turn. The Russians launch this massive offensive, the Brusilov offensive. It hits the Austro-Hungarians hard, really weakens them, and suddenly Germany's got to pick up the slack.
This offensive, it really shook things up. The Austrians were reeling, and even Hindenburg admitted that, complete collapse was a real possibility.
Yeah, it was a wake-up call. And it leads to, another promotion for Hindenburg. First, he's appointed commander of the Eastern Front, then boom, in August 1916, he becomes supreme commander of all the Central Powers. He's basically running the whole show now, with Ludendorff, of course, by his side.
They formed the 3rd OHL, the Supreme Army Command, and essentially took over the German war effort. It was a huge consolidation of power.
So what do they do with all this power? Well, they start shaking things up. On the Western Front, they introduce this new defensive strategy, defense in depth. Basically, it's about, absorbing the enemy's attack, making them pay for every inch of ground.
It was a shift away from the old, rigid lines of defense, a more flexible approach. And it proved pretty effective, at least for a while.
And then there's the Hindenburg program. This was ambitious, to say the least.
Yeah.
Their goal was to, completely mobilize the German economy, ramp up war production, go all in.
Total war. They wanted to harness the entire nation's resources for the war effort.
But it wasn't easy. They faced a lot of pushback, from politicians, industrialists, even from the Kaiser himself. Some of their proposals, they just couldn't get through.
It shows that even with all their power, they weren't, all powerful. They still had to navigate the complexities of German politics.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole unrestricted submarine warfare thing. This was controversial, to say the least. Basically, it meant sinking any, merchant ships, passenger ships, anything that was headed for Britain, even if it was neutral.
It was a gamble, a high-stakes one. They hoped to starve Britain into submission. But they also knew it risked bringing the United States into the war.
And guess what? It did. But Hindenburg and Ludendorff, they pushed for it anyway. It shows, I think, how, determined they were to win, no matter the cost.
And it also highlights their willingness to take risks. Sometimes it paid off, but in this case, it backfired spectacularly.
Yeah, big time. Meanwhile, on the Western Front, they make the strategic retreat in 1917. They pull back to this heavily fortified line called, the Hindenburg Line. It was a big concession, giving up a lot of territory, but it also shortened their lines, made them easier to defend.
It was a calculated move. They knew they couldn't hold all that territory, so they consolidated their forces and dug in.
And on the Eastern Front, well, things were changing there too. The Bolshevik Revolution, it throws Russia into chaos, and they end up signing this peace treaty with Germany, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Hindenburg, he's got big plans for the East, expanding German influence, maybe even annexing some territory.
He saw the East as, Germany's future. He wanted to create this vast German-dominated sphere of influence.
But it's 1918 now, and things are looking pretty bleak for Germany. The war is dragging on, resources are dwindling, morale is low. So Hindenburg and Ludendorff, they decide to go for broke. They launched this massive offensive in the West, the Spring Offensive.
The last roll of the dice. They knew they had to win, and they had to win fast before the Americans arrived in force.
They throw everything they've got into it. Operation Michael, the Lies Offensive, the Schemande Dam Offensive. At first, it seems like they might actually pull it off. They break through the Allied lines, make some serious gains.
It was a close call for the Allies. The Germans came within striking distance of Paris.
But it's not enough. The logistics, they just can't keep up. They run out of supplies, the troops are exhausted, and the Allies, they hold firm. Then the counterattack comes, and it's devastating.
The tide turned, and it turned fast. The German army, it was spent.
The article mentions Ludendorff. After the Allied counteroffensive, he just breaks down. This guy who was always so, energetic, optimistic, he just collapses under the pressure.
The weight of the war, the realization that they'd lost, it was too much for him to bear.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. By September 1918, both Hindenburg and Ludendorff, they know it's over. They tell the government they need to seek an armistice now.
The jig was up. 4 years of brutal war, millions dead, and for what? It was a devastating realization.
And the aftermath, it's chaos, the German Revolution, the Kaiser abdicates, the whole empire just crumbles. Hindenburg, he oversees the retreat of the army, tries to maintain some order in the midst of all this chaos.
A difficult task, to say the least. He was a military man, not a politician.
But his reputation at the end of the war, it's complicated. He achieved some brilliant tactical victories, but strategically, well, Germany lost. Some historians even argue that he was, in Ludendorff's shadow the whole time, that Ludendorff was the real brains behind the operation.
It's a debate that continues to this day.
Yeah.
What was Hindenburg's true role? Was he a brilliant strategist, or was he more of a figurehead, a symbol of German military might?
Okay, so we're into the Weimar Republic now. Germany's defeated. They're forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which is, harsh, to say the least. Hindenburg, he reluctantly accepts it. He knows the army is in no shape to fight another war.
He's pragmatic, he saw the writing on the wall.
He retires again, goes back to Hanover, tries to live a quiet life, but, he's Hindenburg. He can't just fade into obscurity.
Not a chance. He's a national hero. People still revere him.
He publishes his memoirs, Out of My Life, which becomes a bestseller. And in these memoirs, he starts to shape his own narrative of the war, He downplays his role in the defeat, emphasizes his own achievements.
A bit of revisionist history, perhaps.
Maybe. But he's also very careful not to criticize the Kaiser. He remains a loyal monarchist. He testifies before the parliamentary commission that's investigating the war, and this is where he really starts to push the stab-in-the-back myth.
Ah, the stab-in-the-back myth. This was a powerful narrative, the idea that the German army, they were undefeated in the field, but they were betrayed by politicians, by socialists, by pacifists back home.
When Hindenburg, he lends his credibility to this myth. It's a dangerous game he's playing, It fuels resentment. It undermines the New Republic.
It's definitely a turning point.
Yeah.
And it sets the stage for his entry into politics, which is, well, it's a whole other chapter in his story.
So in 1925, at the ripe old age of 77, he decides to run for president of the Weimar Republic. And guess what? He wins.
Can you imagine that? A lifelong monarchist elected president of a republic. It's a bit ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, but it also shows you how messed up the Weimar Republic was. The political system, it was fragile, divided. People were looking for a strong leader, someone they could trust. And who better than the old war hero, Hindenburg?
He was seen as a symbol of stability, of order in a time of great uncertainty.
But Hindenburg, he's not really a Democrat. He doesn't really believe in the whole Republican system. He sees it as like a necessary evil, a means to an end. His goal is to restore Germany's greatness, to regain its lost power and prestige.
And he's not afraid to use his power as president to achieve those goals. He starts relying more and more on Article 48 of the Constitution, which allows him to basically rule by decree.
Yeah, that Article 48, it's a double-edged sword. It's meant for emergencies, but Hindenburg, he uses it to bypass Parliament, to push through his own agenda. And it undermines the whole democratic process, It sets a dangerous precedent.
And it paves the way for the rise of, well, you know who.
Yeah, we're getting there. So in 1931, Hindenburg meets Hitler for the first time. And it doesn't go well. They clash, they dislike each other. Hindenburg, he calls Hitler, and I quote, "that bohemian private first class." Not exactly a term of endearment.
It shows that Hindenburg, at this point, he's not buying into the Nazi hype. He sees Hitler as, well, a bit of an upstart, a rabble-rouser.
But here's the thing. In 1932, Hindenburg runs for re-election as president. And he wins, but it's close. Hitler comes in second. And it shakes Hindenburg, He sees the rising tide of Nazi support, and it worries him.
The old guard, the traditional conservatives, they're losing ground to the Nazis. It's a sign of the times, the growing discontent, the anger, the frustration with the Weimar Republic.
And then in 1933, it all comes to a head. Hitler, through this series of backroom deals and political maneuvering, he manages to get appointed chancellor. And Hindenburg, well, he goes along with it.
This is the fateful decision, the one that seals Germany's fate. Hindenburg, he's convinced by his advisors, particularly Franz von Papen, that they can control Hitler, that they can use him to their own ends.
They think they can tame the tiger, But they're wrong, so wrong. And the consequences, they're devastating.
It's a tragic miscalculation, a fatal error in judgment.
So Hitler's in power now, and Hindenburg, he kind of goes along with it. He approves the Reichstag fire decree, which suspends civil liberties, gives the Nazis sweeping powers. Then he approves the Enabling Act, which basically makes Hitler a dictator.
It's the end of the Weimar Republic, the beginning of the Nazi era, and Hindenburg, he plays a key role in it, even though he personally dislikes Hitler.
It's a complex situation. Hindenburg, he's old, he's frail, he's surrounded by these advisors who are, whispering in his ear, telling him that Hitler's the only one who can save Germany. And Hindenburg, he wants order, he wants stability, he wants Germany to be strong again, and he sees Hitler maybe as the answer.
It's a dangerous mix, desperation, wishful thinking, a longing for the past. It blinds Hindenburg to the true nature of the Nazi threat.
And then in 1934, it gets even worse. The Night of the Long Knives. Hitler, he purges his own party, murders his rivals, consolidates his power even further, and there's this telegram, supposedly from Hindenburg, approving of the purge.
That telegram, it was fake, a forgery. Goering admitted it later at the Nuremberg trials, but it was used at the time to, legitimize Hitler's actions, to make it seem like he had the backing of the old guard.
It's chilling, The way they manipulate Hindenburg using his name, his authority to cover up their crimes.
And Hindenburg, he's too weak, too ill to really fight back. He dies in August 1934, and within hours, Hitler declares himself Führer, merging the offices of president and chancellor. The Third Reich is born.
And Hindenburg, he's buried at the Tannenberg Memorial, the site of his greatest victory. But it's a controversial decision. It's later revealed that he didn't want to be buried there, that he wanted to be buried with his wife. But the Nazis, they use his burial for propaganda purposes, to link themselves to his legacy, to claim his mantle.
It's a final indignity, a final act of manipulation.
So what's the legacy of Paul von Hindenburg? Well, it's complicated. He was a war hero, a national icon, a symbol of German strength and resilience. But he was also a deeply flawed figure, a man who made some terrible decisions that had catastrophic consequences.
His story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the greatest heroes can be fallible, that good intentions can pave the road to hell.
And it leaves us with a lot of questions, What if he had made different choices? What if he had died earlier? What if he had stood up to Hitler more forcefully? Could he have prevented the Nazi rise to power?
Those are questions that historians continue to debate. And they're questions worth pondering because they remind us that history is not inevitable, that it's shaped by the choices that individuals make.
So for our listeners who want to dig deeper into this, really explore the complexities of Hindenburg's life and legacy, I'd recommend checking out some of the biographies that are out there, ones that really delve into his political maneuvering during the Weimar Republic, his relationship with Hitler, all of that.
And also understanding the broader context, the social and political climate of the Weimar Republic, the rise of extremism, the appeal of authoritarianism. It's all connected.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating, albeit tragic story, and it's one that I think we can all learn from. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.